Hello, and welcome to the Empowered Learning Podcast. This is your host, Andy Bennett. On today's episode, we welcome Meg Stevens. Meg is a passionate and inspirational leadership coach, served as an organizational change agent for multiple Fortune 500 companies, a licensed professional counselor, the founder of Meg Stevens Consulting, and the host of Natural Leadership Retreats. Welcome, Meg. Hey, Meg, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
It's been a minute. We connected a little while ago, probably about a week or so ago, and kind of caught up a little bit. But before that, it was a lot longer than we either wanted to admit as to how long it's been since we've seen each other, right?
Right. We were in undergrad together like just yesterday, right? Yesterday.
Exactly. We were just talking about how young we look, and not a day has passed, right?
That's right.
I love it. The truth of the matter is that you have lived a very rich and awesome life that I cannot wait to dive into, because you've just done some really fun and exciting things, worked for some awesome companies, and made a big difference. So thank you so much for spending a few minutes on the podcast. And I appreciate it and looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I feel really lucky about the journey that I've been on so far and the one that's continuing. And so glad I ran into you again, because likewise, you've had so many fantastic opportunities as well.
God is good. Life is good.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, I know you up till about undergrad, and then we've got reconnected here. But for the folks that don't know you, give us a little bit of a background of kind of your upbringing, kind of your professional journey up to this point, and kind of what tomorrow brings for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you said, we kind of knew each other at undergrad, and I grew up in the Front Range of Colorado, in Broomfield, Colorado, and found my way down to Adams State and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, like many of us in undergrad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately I ended up studying English and history. And so I got both of those degrees pretty quickly because that's what I was good at. I had a lot of credits in that, right? So very pragmatic in terms of my career and what I wanted to do with that. At first, I thought I wanted to teach, but just a little bit of time in the classroom let me know that I wasn't sure that I wanted to spend time with high schoolers, particularly at that young age that I was at, right? And at that time, I actually got involved in housing and residence life. You might remember I was an RA.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. I forgot that piece of it. But yeah, we were RAs together. How cool were we, right?
That's right. We're totally awesome as RAs. And I even became a hall director. And actually, I did that after undergrad. Was a hall director in Portland, Oregon for a while, and then in Nebraska, University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
Nice.
And in that job, you're like 25 years old. And then you're all of a sudden, especially by the time I got to University of Nebraska-Lincoln, you're in charge of a building of like 3,000 people.
Wow.
And like, it's all of this responsibility, and you've got a team of RAs, and that's great and a ton of fun because there's a bunch of college energy, but it's also really hard. Like, managing people is hard, right?
Sure.
So I wasn't sure what I wanted to study for graduate school, but that kind of tipped me off in the whole idea of leading people is hard. It's a wonderful privilege, but it's also really hard. And they happen to have a wonderful cross-school program that was leadership development. So it was with the School of Agriculture, the School of Human Sciences, and the School of Business, kind of all collaborating for a degree that fit into this really nice space. And I feel really lucky with some of the folks that I got to study with at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln that were affiliated with the Gallup organization, as well as many other businesses. But Bruce Avolio was one leader in particular who wrote kind of the thesis and kind of the starting piece around transformational leadership. What does it mean to be a transformational leader? And what's that look like? And so I really got inspired by leadership and change, and found myself working in consulting after grad school. So I worked for a consulting firm that supported HR folks and leaders and organizations in how do you find the best person for the right job? So how do you really understand the work to get the right person in it so that everybody's happier? And then how do you work on employee engagement? So those were kind of the sweet spots that we worked in. I got to work with a lot of IO psychologists, which were these like incredibly smart, statistically minded folks that taught me all sorts of things about using stats to understand human behavior. I was really, really lucky to get to spend some time with mentors in that space, and really had an incredible experience, and was consulting with HR folks a lot. And every time in my life I've said something like, "Oh, I'll never, fill in the blank," say that to my kids, be
Right.
that kind of whatever. And I used to say at that point in time, "Oh, those poor HR folks, I'll never be one of those."
That's
Never. I can see what their lives are like from here. But of course, the way that the world works, I found myself faced with an opportunity to go inside an organization, get to do some consulting, not as an external provider, but from within, where you could deeply know what an organization was up to and how to best support the leaders and work really intimately with them in a change management capacity. And this role was like under the HR function, but it was called a mindsets and behaviors expert, and it was part of a business transformation group. And so I thought, well, I'm safe. This isn't really HR.
Right. I haven't gone to the dark side yet, right?
That's right. I'm not going to really be an HR person.
I love it.
So I spent a little bit of time there doing organizational change transformation with production folks in a giant agriculture organization, helping them kind of figure out how to get management practices and rituals in place, and really work on their engagement in their employee environment. So working with plant leaders and then their directors throughout. And then that was when I was living in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was traveling quite a bit just locally around the US to do that work, and had an opportunity to relocate my family and myself to the Des Moines, Iowa area to work for that same company, doing leadership development and learning more corporately for that part of the business. And so I did that for about 5 years, doing leadership development, programming and interventions, working on succession planning. And then found myself kind of getting involved and asked to support implementation of a lot of technology stuff. So implemented Workday, if you've ever heard of that human resources technology platform, as well as LMS later on in some of my work. But ended up working with all of the kind of the mother company that owned this other group, and so spent a lot of time on the East Coast and in Des Moines. And then there became this mega merger. The company that I was working for was DuPont, and Dow and DuPont merged together to create one company for a period of time, with the intention of spinning off into 3 new companies, one that would be solely agriculture, one that would go back to being sort of what DuPont was, minus the agriculture piece, and one that would become what Dow was, minus some of what their agriculture piece was. And so that was a wonderful and fascinating experience. I like to quote the CEO that I worked with, who became the CEO of the agriculture company. He said, all of the leaders right now, it's like we're this merger with a planned separation at the end. It's like planning a wedding with a divorce in mind, right? So like nobody wants to agree on like what kind of like flatware should we get, right? What should the plates look like? Because everybody's like just waiting for the divorce to get here. So So I had a lot of fun working with leaders in that space, and helping them kind of create the roadmap, as well as then communicate and explain that to employees for all of that change, that tremendous amount of change, about 90,000 people, as well as working on how do you create the processes, the tools, the systems for like who's going to go where of these 90,000 people? How do we decide who gets what jobs, and what does that look like? So worked on creating and those processes, and then helping the teams kind of work on how they capture all that information, and had lots of help along the way. Led a tremendous team through a lot. And then as the new company, I stayed with the agriculture group because they were headquartered, well, a good portion of them are still here in the Des Moines, Iowa area. Stayed with them as a senior director in human resources, and we jumped from becoming a new company and right into the pandemic. And so I led our talent processes and our inclusion, equity, and diversity during the pandemic, and during the murder of George Floyd, which happened kind of just up the street from us in Minneapolis. And worked with the organization on like, what do we communicate, the executives, the C-suite, on what do we communicate and how do we do it and what is our action plan? And not to mention, we're still struggling with, when are we going to ever see each other again? Because we're all out of the office and all of the challenges of that. So along that time frame, I, as we were kind of coming out of the pandemic, I also just took a look at my own wonderful, blessed family, and I have two teens that are thriving, what I call baby adults now, 18 and 20 about. And, I saw what a hardship the pandemic was for them and their development, and knowing what I had just experienced with leaders and these really intense business challenges, knowing that they had like a picture perfect world, as perfect as it could get during the pandemic. But it was still like pretty traumatizing to them. And, at some point there's going to be some gap when they're, 35 or 40, they're going to be kind of faced with like, something maybe they didn't fully experience or some challenge that would really require not only the skills of leadership development that I'm pretty skilled in now, but some real mental health kind of potential opportunities. So I decided to go back to school and study mental health and really focus my attention on how can I help leaders in a coaching capacity and then also soon to be in a mental health capacity as they're, struggling and working through all of the work that they do every day, because I think that leaders are so important to our environment, and in business and in any kind of work setting, they really kind of can make it or break it for their employees. So that was a long story of my path, but that's the path.
I love it. That's really exciting. Yeah, lots of things that we could chat about. You mentioned kind of like a change organization, and you hear that term, thrown about like, oh, I'm a change agent and that kind of stuff. And I mean, I guess if you break it down, it's like, okay, the only constant is change. So, how is a change agent different than anybody else that's just dealing with constant changes? So I guess, can you demystify what does that look like to be an organizational change agent that is on the front edge of thinking? And you mentioned processes. I think that's a really big aspect of it, is that, if you don't go through it with a plan, then things are going to catch you off guard, and then you're reacting rather than being proactive. So would love to get your thoughts on just what does it mean to be a change agent, and what did you learn along that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a number of different changes that I was involved with, and I kind of think of myself as kind of supporting and being a catalyst to help the leaders in the organization manage through that change. And what that typically meant is sometimes there's a business need, right? Or it doesn't, I'll use the business examples because that's what I know the best, but we need to start producing, 2x what we've produced in the past, as an example. And guess what? We're not going to build new production facilities in order to do that. We just need to figure out how we get better, smarter, faster. That's the change that's needed, right? Now, what does that actually, from a process perspective, the business change, but it is about like everybody has to be on board with that change. So you've identified your change that's needed, but certainly producing twice as much in a day for me, Meg, the operator, who's already working, as much as I possibly can, that doesn't feel like it's my need. My need is to, be able to go home at 5 o'clock and not at 7. Right? That's my need.
Right.
So how do we connect those needs to each other? And that's really what the change process is about, is helping to identify, well, here's the business need that we might be having. What's the real purpose underneath that? And then how do we help all of the individuals that are involved in that need identify what their own purpose is and connect their purpose to that need, and all serve it together in terms of getting all of the motion going in the same direction.
Right. Yeah, it's really good. And you touched on that a couple of times when you were doing your initial thing of just there. I don't know. It's much more complicated than this, but there's much more than meets the eye, right? It's not just like, hey, and this is probably why you were not leaning into HR, right? You don't want to be part of that system that doesn't see the people and the actions. Like, if it comes down from on high, it says, hey, we need to 2x our output. That's all good and fine in the leadership side of things, but there's real people that are having to make those changes. And how do we connect the two where we can still, do what it is that we need to do and not burn our people out or not, make them feel unneeded or unappreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely the best changes that I was involved with were those changes that were working from the top down and the bottom up.
Right.
And so, using that production example, that was where we started. And, I had kind of business process experts that would be I would be part of the kind of the emotional side of the team, if you will, the mindset, the behaviors. And I would have folks that were Six Sigma and process efficiency experts. And together with one of my process and efficiency experts, we would go to the floor and say, okay, so we've got to increase our production. Like, what would it take for you to be able to do more? And guess what? People at the bottom, they have the best insight. They would say, well, yeah, I could do like 4x if I didn't have to stop and, write down these 7 things every 2 minutes, then I would be able to get through, 10 times more widgets. But, and so, okay, well, let's understand, why do you have to stop and write down those 7 things? What's that providing? How do we remove those barriers? And so the best leaders that I've worked with really are the ones that understand their role as removers of barriers. My job is to get in there and understand what's in the way of my people and remove the barriers for them.
I love that. Remove barriers. I'm going to go with that, right? Yep, that's great. What are some other things that you learned along the way, just as far as going from leaning out of that idea of being in the HR world to then being not only in it, but also leading it and trying to, and I think that I come from an education side. So like when you're on the other side, you want to take in and kind of see things through the lenses of the people that you're actually working with. And I'm sure that was kind of your thought process too. What are some other things that you, I guess, brought into that mindset of, we don't want to diminish or make the people that are, and again, I'm using quotes for the bottom, right? We know that everybody is needed and necessary, but what are some things that you feel like you brought to that to make sure that they were not overlooked or not treated like they needed to be?
I think the first is some of what you just said there. Like, everyone has a place in making the system work. And one of I'll use a term that I have learned more from my counseling world that I think is really critical, but it embodies so much of who I am as a person that I'm like, why didn't I learn this sooner? And it comes from Carl Rogers, who talks about unconditional positive regard. And if we can hold each other in the space of unconditional positive regard, where we believe, even if Andy's screaming at me because, something didn't go well in his world today, I can hold that, like, Andy's human and his motivation is, ultimately for a good means. It might not be hitting me right, but if I can hold him in that unconditional positive regard, then it gives me that space for creativity, for curiosity, for compassion. And those 3 things, I think, are some of what is so important to me in order to embody learning, that creativity, curiosity, and compassion.
Got to get those down. That's awesome. Creativity, what was the third one?
Curiosity and compassion.
Yeah. That's awesome. I talked to my wife about this a lot, of just, and it was not in such an eloquent way, but the idea of just expecting or not assuming the best in people rather than assuming the worst. And I think, oh my gosh, like, if the world could just grab onto that, and rather than just jumping to the absolute worst case scenario of the reason so-and-so did this is because they hate me. And I mean, like, it's ridiculous how quickly we jump to the worst case scenario rather than taking a second, taking a breath, being like, okay, they got their own junk that they're dealing with, right? This might not hit right, but are they really out to get me? Are they really in this to make my life miserable? Maybe sometimes, but I would guess 99% of the time, it's not the case, right?
Right. Absolutely. And so it is very much like, what's that story I'm telling myself about the situation? And, so whether it was helping kind of people experience change from that perspective of what's that story that I'm telling myself, or, also sometimes when you're a leader and you've got to be driving change, you have to challenge and ask yourself, what's the story I'm telling myself? Because sometimes we get caught in that, like, I've told everybody, and they're still not doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the story you're telling yourself is that you've told everyone and now they should automatically be doing it. And like, why
Mm-hmm.
would that be true?
Right.
Right. So it is a little bit of unpacking that on a regular basis of like,
Right.
what's the story?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a term, and I forget the guy's name, but you said transformational leadership, and that's as someone that has a master's in education leadership. I thought at this point in my life I would be leading a school, and God had other plans in my life. But that idea of what is leadership? I know that the name of your company is Natural Leadership. Am I doing that right?
Just Meg Stevens. Yeah, just
There we
Meg
go.
Stevens Consulting, but my Twitter and my Facebook handles are about leading naturally, because
Leading
I
naturally.
think really that it is about finding what's right and authentic for you,
Mm-hmm.
and really starting in that space when you're thinking about how you can lead others.
And now, a brief commercial from today's sponsor.
Hey guys, Andy Bennett's owner and president of Interactive Learning. Our awesome little company has been around for close to 20 years now, and our core purpose and mission is to empower the future of education with innovative solutions through engaging technologies and leadership programs. We are blessed to work with a wide range of markets, including K-12, trades, corporate, and government. Interactive Learning is also proud to serve our nation's JROTC programs with over 3,000 units and 500,000 cadets. For our podcast listeners today, we have a special offer just for you. It's called our Class Tech Discovery Session. This is incredibly helpful for teachers, administrators, tech personnel, really anybody involved in helping students learn with technology. Here's what you get with the Class Tech Discovery Session. It starts with a short Zoom call. We'll talk about your class needs, your wants, desires, really your class wish list of ed tech. Then we'll touch on your timelines and budgets, plus any constraints that your district might be facing. Next, we'll look at new tech and new solutions, the latest and greatest out there that might be applicable to you and your district. And if you're interested, we'll even demonstrate these crazy cool, cutting-edge technologies just for you. Finally, we'll give you an idea of costs and professional development and how we and our team will support you moving forward. Again, that is Interactive Learning's Class Tech Discovery Session. Request your session now by texting Discovery to 970-739-2229 or emailing Discovery to andy@intlrn.com. Request your school's highly informative Class Tech Discovery Session today.
And now, back to the Empowered Learning Podcast.
So maybe two different things. Let's talk about kind of transformational leadership and what that means and what you've seen and grown in, and then maybe why you landed on that as kind of your call sign of leading naturally. So whichever order you would like to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the journey into transformational leadership was really a fun space. And Bruce Avolio wrote with I'm going to forget the other name. Bass is the last name, but they wrote one of the kind of foundational papers in that space, and they outlined a handful of characteristics that are really critical for transformational leaders. And the ones that stick with me the most are that you've got to have some level of attraction to a transformational leader, right? So there has to be something that's attracting other people. And, sometimes that gets called charisma or gets called, some other kind of word for attraction, but that's part of it. And so, really for other people to be attracted to you, you have to step outside of yourself and be thinking about the world from a view from outside of your own. So that's one of the key pieces that I've really hung on to from a transformational leadership perspective. The strategic component of it is another element. And so, strategy is a big word and it gets thrown around a lot. But to me, what a transformational leader has and does related to strategy is really a vision and some steps to execute that vision. And so that strategy for me is about being able to sell that vision and then having some idea of what can help get that vision achieved. And then the third piece that that I really took from some of that work was about this idea of individualized consideration. So the way that a leader, can inspire and help you, Andy, see their vision and what the strategy looks like might not be the same way that they need to communicate and help me be inspired and, see what that vision and that strategy look like. So that individualized consideration is a key piece of, how leaders in transformation are successful.
Right.
And it's because they not only step outside of themselves for that attraction piece, but then when they're mobilizing resources, when they're trying to get everybody moving the same direction, they move into that individualized consideration perspective. And a lot of that is very strengths based. So because there was a lot of Gallup folks that I was exposed to early in my career, a lot of the Clifton Strengths Finders kind of elements were real prevalent. And so I do tend to see people that I work with, and as I led these large teams, that was really some of what I leaned on and what was really comfortable for me.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you mentioned the strengths model, right? I mean, we're pretty new in this podcast, and you're the third of my guests that have mentioned strengths model. Dr. Huff, which that episode has not dropped yet, got his dissertation in that. Christian, who's doing AI work, is very, very versed in strengths-based thing. And this, and I think, again, that comes back to individualizing that, changing your leadership style depending on who it is that you're dealing with. It's not always going to be a heavy hand. Sometimes it's a collaborative effort. I love that. That's really, really good. I had a thought on the attraction idea of things. I can't think of it right now. I'll have to come back to it though. That's exciting stuff. That's really good.
Well, and I can connect. I think you were saying then, how did I land on this natural leadership?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to me, it is a little bit of that attraction is connected to this natural leadership, right? Because I think one of the things that if you've led in big organizations that, you haven't started yourself in particular, you sometimes find yourself in this place of middle management, right? Where you're asked to do things that you're not on board with. It doesn't feel natural, right?
Right.
And so what is that process that, helps us with that incongruency of that natural leadership, or when we're in that place of we've got a lot going on, and like you said, there's the only thing that for sure is going to happen is change. So if we are like having some significant change fatigue, like how do we work through that? How do we figure that out? And for me, a big component, and this is really some of my more recent learning, is kind of tapping into that authenticity for that natural leadership style, kind of pulling on those strengths of your own, but then also even turning to nature as inspiration. And this doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a big, hike the Grand Canyon kind of experience, right? It can be as simple as me looking over at the plants in my window and noticing that, the leaves at the bottom are getting bigger and facing the sun, and they're taking that path of least resistance, and just kind of taking in mind that path of least resistance. And maybe that's something I need to really hear about my work today is where am I not taking the path of least resistance? And that's like an example that nature's giving me, and again, it can be very simple, but it's a little bit on calling on something bigger than ourselves that's not man-made or man-tainted in any way, or woman-tainted in any way, that can just help us reconnect to that there's something to listen to and to really get grounded in. And it doesn't have to be a big moment, but it's a little brief meditation of connecting with the natural world that can help us feel more natural in the way that we're working as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. I'm glad I turned it back to you, because that was the exact word that I was thinking of, and you connected it to like attraction. I think that is a kind of a misnomer, is that, you read like Dale Carnegie things and that kind of stuff, and people can kind of go off the rails of like, oh, I can, make people like me by doing this. And it's kind of a manipulative thing, rather than, to your point, being authentic, right? I mean, having a real connection and a real desire to get to know somebody and want to share, your heart with them and have them share their heart with you. I think that goes way further than, any kind of manipulative way of trying to get people to like you or come on board with your mission or whatever. I think that goes a long ways.
Oh, absolutely. And isn't that a hard thing to do? Like if you've worked in sales at all, or even not in sales, but in, just even trying to put your own business up, your own podcasts up, right? Anything that you've done on your own where, you want to please others so badly that it's easy to fall into like, let me change myself so that I can get you what you need in this moment. So you'll say yes. Right. But we know that doesn't serve us in the long term. And so how do we hang on to that authenticity, even in those moments when it's really difficult? And I think that's really what leadership is about, is hanging on to that authenticity in those moments when it's difficult. And for some of us, that's because, we have those people pleasing tendencies and we want people to like us. For others of us, it's, kind of recognizing that our sense of self is bigger than it should be and that we need to pull it back, right? And we maybe should be more curious and not have that big stance and opinion, and it's a little bit too strong. So it works in both directions, regardless of kind of where you fall on that continuum of readiness to be out there and in front of folks.
Right. I love that. So I want to dive into your kind of transition. You were working through the ranks and doing all this fun work and working with these really massive organizations. And it's interesting that COVID was, I guess that's not interesting. It is interesting, but it's not unique to just you. There's so many people that was the catalyst of like, everything's going to change. I'm going to only work at home, or I'm reinventing myself. We're going to go do something else. I think it sounds like you're taking that and seeing a new need and a new issue and problem that arose through that, both in your kiddos' lives and the work life, and said, yes, I need to apply all of the stuff that I learned before, but it needs to be more. So I guess tell me a story of what was an aha moment or kind of a turning point of like, yes, all of my work in HR has been good, but I need to be able to connect at a heart level. I need to be able to speak to people about mental health. Like, what was that turning point for you?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say there was just one, because I think there were so many, and some of it was, hearing like this mental health crisis on a regular basis in HR. It was like, how are we going to support the mental health crisis? And, knowing that the workforce was even going to just look really different, post COVID, our folks that were, starting college, in college, just, out of college, that was going to be a really different workforce than what we'd experienced before. And some of that, knowing, again, my educational background helped me know, like, we didn't socially miss some developmental steps because of COVID. And depending on where you're on in your life, that matters in more places than it does others. So I would say that that was like a really strong force for me. But I'll also tell you a personal story that I've been a runner, jogger. I've run a couple marathons, some half marathons. I think I taught aerobics and maybe jogged on the side when I was in undergrad, but that's always been a place of huge stress relief for me. And in May of 2020, I had a bike accident and I broke my wrist and I fractured my pelvis, and I couldn't run for 6 weeks. And I didn't realize, how much I leaned on that as a grounding source and as a source of stress relief and as a source of, needing to take care of myself. And so it did really open my eyes. I thought, well, gosh, what has everybody else in the world been doing when they can't run, right? Particularly people that were in kind of these similar high stress, highly intense roles that I've been in, and I understood their, some of their challenges a whole lot better from that perspective as well. So that was probably some of the other piece for me, was knowing like, okay, I've had a real personal experience of like, when you can't get grounded in the way that you're used to, needing to fill that with something. And, fortunately I, got into yoga and filled it with all sorts of other like good things. But it could have been easy to fill it with a glass of wine every night and or more, right? And go down some paths that would have been really difficult to come back from. So I think that really opened me to the sense of empathy for not only, the global stress that we were experiencing, but the stress of leaders that really, and me being one carrying, I carried the weight of the organization on my shoulders, wanting to do well for everyone. Right. And so how do you take care of yourself? And so wanting to move from not only doing that work myself, but also really taking care of other people and supporting them through their journeys where they're doing that.
Right. I love that. You mentioned some, so COVID was a big enough issue and a hard enough thing for all of us to work through. And then, the George Floyd situation impacted everybody to differing degrees, I would imagine, because you were close and because you are in a large public spotlight. I think everybody was under a microscope of, all right, how are you going to deal with this? What is your response going to be? Knowing that if you come across as insensitive, you could be, raked through the coals and just, it could go very bad, very, very quickly. So, I would love to hear, from somebody that was living that in a big corporate world. What were some of the thoughts that went through your guys' minds as far as, yes, our heart breaks for that situation. We don't stand for that, of course, but what is our stance in response to this terrible thing where we're not alienating, or it gets political so quickly. And it's really just a person. It's a human issue, but people politicize things like that way quickly. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how you guys maneuvered all that.
Yeah, it was definitely intense. So I think that's a good word for it. And like you said, politically challenging, and in particular, working for this big agriculture company where a lot of the clientele leans the clients lean in one direction politically, and where you might have people running the company sitting in New York City or, in the East Coast feeling much, of a more liberal mindset. And how do you bring those opposing views together? And I have to give a lot of credit to the CEO at the time, Jim Collins, who was really said, I don't know what we do here. So he had spoken with a number of the Black leaders in the company, and they had been saying, Jim, you have to do something. And he really quickly stood up a steering team that I was lucky enough to be working. I was the facilitator of the steering team pretty quickly. And so where we really started with that was let's just start by getting to know each other as human beings. What's calling you into the steering committee at the moment? And kind of making space for the humanity in it. And that gave us as a team a little more opportunity to problem solve, to identify, different actions that we could take, and kind of figure out what the best path forward was in that situation. And so we did all sorts of things in terms of, really standing up a roadmap related to what are some of the learning initiatives that we were a brand new company at the time, still a brand new old company, right? Because it was a merger of two companies that had been around for quite a while, but standing up, what is our educational portfolio around diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we measure it? What are some of the things we want to measure currently, and how do we want to measure things going forward? So kind of a portfolio of actions that we took. But I think that making space for humanity was really the starting point, because in addition to those learning pieces and the goal setting that we worked on, we also just had a lot of forums where we let people talk. And at that time, that was so important, because we had employees that wanted their voice to be heard about how they had been touched by the situation. We had employees who this ignited for them the fact that, their identity, which was not a Black identity, but it was a something else identity, still didn't feel fully recognized in the organization. And so making space for that was really critical. So those interactions and the leadership, the executive leadership, really stepping in to be there for those conversations, I think are some of what really helped us get through that challenging time.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I don't envy you in that role, because like I said, it could, I don't know. And that's a little too high stakes for my liking. So kudos to you guys for sticking through those difficult times, because that, I can imagine, that would have been kind of like, felt like just a powder keg, just waiting to blow one way or the other. So just kind of handling that with grace and humanity, and then obviously you guys did a great job. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Well, Meg, it's kind of crazy that it's already been a little bit of time, but let's wrap things up here. I have a fun question for you that I think would be good for that kind of pairs well with the last one there. In the work that you've done up to this point, and then moving forward as you are doing your own consulting and working with folks as a coach, how do you foster a culture of innovation within your work or organization? So we've recognized that change is constant, but you can do that with a heart. So how do you foster that culture of innovation while, not leaving people behind or not letting them feel not valued?
Yeah. For me, this is easy because it's kind of my natural style, and it's accept everything and play.
All right.
I love to play. And so I think if you can start with a space for, like, let's just bring whatever is coming up and then let's have some fun with that, then you can really spark that innovation and spark creativity and get the best out of people as well.
I love it. Well, that was easy. You just, I didn't even give that to her ahead of time, believe it or not. She just had that ready to go. I love it. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. So everybody on the Empowered Learning Podcast gets 3 key questions at the end here. So Meg, who is a leader? You mentioned a few that you've, had the pleasure of working with, and some folks that you've read on, but who is the leader that you most admire and try to emulate?
Yeah, and this is I know that you gave me this question in advance, Andy, and I could have studied.
Yes, this one, yes,
I know
not the
one
previous
I had,
one.
not the previous one, and I could have studied for days trying to pick out the perfect person, and I am going to be such a cop-out guest here and say, like, I think every person I meet, I find something in them that I admire and try to emulate, and I think for this interaction, like, your energy is so inspiring to me, Andy, and that's something I'm going to take with me for the rest of the rest of my week. So I think I really all of us are in leadership with each other whenever we're in interaction, and I try to really honor that.
I love it. I'll pay you your whatever.
Right. Not even bribed. Not even bribed.
I know,
for
right.
that part.
That's very sweet of you. I appreciate it. Awesome. All right. Question number 2 is, we are at the beginning. I guess we're through the first month of January of 2024, but we're still pretty early in the year. So looking back over the last year or so, what is the learning that has most impacted you?
This is a really hard question for somebody that's gone back to grad school at 45, right? Because especially if you consider yourself a lifelong learner, and this is something you're kind of always working on. Sure. But I think those words that I shared earlier from Carl Rogers, that concept of unconditional positive regard, it put a label on something that's kind of been in my heart for such a long time, that it gave it so much validity, and is really bringing a new space to the way that I lead, as well as helping me as I get into this work of counseling.
What did you say his last name was? Carl what?
Carl Rogers.
R-O-D or R-O-G? R-O-G.
And he's quite old school. He wrote a lot in the 60s and 70s.
Gotcha. Sometimes those classic learnings are ones that we just can't get away from, right?
That's right. Our parents will love him. So
yeah, exactly. All right, last one. How would you empower learning for future generations? We got lots of different angles that you can look at that through. The HR, the mom, the entrepreneur, the coach moving forward here. But if you could wave your magic wand and empower learning for future generations, how would you do that?
I think I would just continue to instill that mindset of, like, we're never done. It's just always a journey. And when you're not, I can't imagine not learning. I can't imagine a world where we're not always kind of finding something new and exciting about it. So I think for my own baby adults, they're kind of inspired at this career pivot that I've taken at the point in life that I have. But I think really I try to talk with them a lot about, a career is not who you are. You're always yourself, and you get to do a lot of different things along the way. So be inspired by what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. And as someone that's got kiddos that are just a little bit younger than yours, I will be maybe reaching out for notes for that next phase right there. We haven't transitioned to calling them baby adults, but it's coming quicker than I want it to. So
yeah, it does.
I love it. Well, Megan, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for just your heart. I can definitely tell that you are in this for the right reasons. Whether you have the term HR person or not, I know your part, and you are in this for the right reason. So thank you for all the great work that you've done. I'm excited to see what your future holds, and I hope that you and I get to work together in some aspect moving forward.
Absolutely. You bet. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I feel so grateful.
Absolutely. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Bye.